I'm Takoda Madrona, and this is how to make a Frit pipe. So for this tutorial, you're going to be using Frit glass. It is powdered glass, and as you can see on the front of this powdered glass, it has a big skeleton on it. That's because it is dangerous. Frit is powdered glass, meaning powder, and powder is messy. So powder can get everywhere. Now, glass is not toxic or poisonous like some other materials, so if you do ingest some of it, it theoretically can just go through your system. But when you breathe glass, your body doesn't reject it the same way as it does other materials and can't necessarily cough it out. So you can't breathe in Frit or lots of it, otherwise you can and should be hospitalized and have to have that figured out. So, Frit is a bit dangerous opposed to a lot of things that we do use in glass blowing. Even though glass blowing is generally dangerous itself, a lot of it isn't always that dangerous. Frit, on the other hand, can be. So when using Frit, I advise you to always be careful. Never open your Frit containers near your face, as little bits of powder will be released from the container as you open it. If you spill Frit, back away, let your ventilation take what it can, come back to it, spray the area down with lots of water, and clean up appropriately. Use a ventilation mask, if possible, while cleaning up Frit. When using Frit, try not to dump it all over the place and manipulate it as least as possible. Don't mix the Frit around with your spoon. Don't do a lot of things. Try to keep the Frit in your container, move it from one container to another container, using a face mask a lot of the time. Be careful. And then use your spoon, pick up your Frit, and move it from place to place, and try not to sniff it. With that said, Frit is very fun. It can be an awesome application to glass, and I hope you enjoy the tutorial. In this tutorial, I will cover how to make a Frit pipe using a clear piece of tubing. Use clear tubing, and we're going to be doing internal Frit work. So I will be applying the Frit to the inside of the tube. We will melt it down and then make our pipe. You can make a Frit pipe in a lot of ways. I describe 2 different ways in this tutorial, and I show you one way. Some people make a Frit pipe using a can that has a punty attached to it. Some people make a Frit pipe using a can with a blow tube attached to it. Some people make Frit pipes with external Frit rather than internal Frit. And there are many different applications for Frit. In this tutorial, you will be learning how to make an internal Frit pipe with clear tubing attached to a blow tube. I will fill in gaps and add details to other techniques as well. Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy it. We are going to make a Frit spoon. So we're going to make a pipe out of Frit. In this, you're going to be using powdered glass, which can be very messy and get everywhere. So a lot of people like to use a can that has a punty attached to it so that the Frit doesn't go down the blow tube. I tend to use a can that has a blow tube attached to it because it saves me time. So I'm going to be doing this tutorial using a can that has a blow tube attached to it. But it won't really change much of the process, and anything that it does change, I will inform you of. Whether or not you have a can with a blow tube or a punty, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to warm up your can. You're going to spin 360 degrees, nice and consistent, and then make motions back and forth, nice and consistent. And that will evenly heat your tube. I'm going to use a bigger flame right now and speed up this process. Now my goal here is I'm going to warm up my tube. I don't want my tube to move. I don't want my tube to become malleable and wiggle around. I just want to warm it up a little bit. Now that my can is warm, I'm going to throw some frit in there. Now the big difference with the blow tube can versus the punty can is I cannot turn my can all the way vertical. With a punty can, you can turn your can all the way vertical and pour your frit right in. When you have a blow tube, you don't want the frit to go into your blow tube. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to angle slightly backwards from horizontal to allow that frit to slightly pour back into my can, but not go into my blow tube. So I will spin and pour. And you'll notice if I pour and I don't spin, it's not going to go anywhere. But if I spin and pour, that frit will make its way down the tube. Now once I have some frit in there, I like to start off with the front end. Because frit likes to pour out the front. If I warm up the front end, then it doesn't like to pour out. And as you see here, the frit is inside my tube. I heated the front. The frit stuck to the front, and it is not pouring out the front. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to continue heating and then make a typewriter motion all the way towards the back. I'm keeping my can horizontal to the table to keep the frit from pouring into my blow tube. And as you can see, I'm making my typewriter motion all the way down my piece, and as it gets warm, the frit sticks to the side of the wall. When you use a punty can, you can do this heating method the other way around. You heat from the back end all the way up to the front. Now it looks like I don't have enough frit in there, so I'm going to pour a little bit more frit in there. And I'll start again. I like to just start off in the front first, but I'll let that frit fall back to the back end as I spin, and then I'll go right back to where I was. And I continue my process. I continue this typewriter process. As I go down the tube, it warms it, allows that frit to stick. Don't be afraid to use more frit. The more frit you use, the better, from my experience. I never use enough frit in my mouthpiece. Pour a little extra frit in there, make sure it gets back there. And there we go. The ends are trickier. And now, my whole can is full of frit. As you can see, it's full of frit, it's covered in frit. But now I gotta close up my other end. This open end that I was using to pour the frit into, I wanna close that up now, because I gotta connect a punty to it and start working it into a pipe. So I'm gonna take my paddle here, and I could either there are many ways to close up a hole like this. You'll see in contemporary lamp working, they use a little tweezer tool and they grab it and they pull it forward. You can also do a similar action with your punty. You can grab some glass and pull it all to the center and close it up. You can even add glass and close it up. Or you can use a paddle of some sort. You could use your L marver you have on your torch, or you can use a paddle. What you're going to do is heat up the glass that you want to manipulate, come out of the flame, take an angle with the paddle, and your glass will take to that angle. So you touch to that piece and you start spinning, and that will close up that front end. Whatever angle you take to the paddle, whatever angle that paddle takes is the position that your glass will take. And as long as you spin nice and evenly, give the same amount of pressure, it will be circular. So give it a little push, a little spin, angle, and that's closing her up. And you can do this in the flame as well, as long as you're gentle with your graphite. Angle and close her up. Now it's almost closed, and when it's really close, I like to just close it up with a punty. Saves me a little bit of time, and simultaneously I can just connect my punty to it if I leave it in the flame. Could disconnect if I want to. Close it up and then reconnect if it's not a good connection. But basically I just leave the punty there and let it fuse. But with this, when I'm making a frit pipe, I actually want to close that guy up. So you use the paddle, close them completely, or use your little punty, close them completely, disconnect. And then what we're going to do is we're going to heat up this end bit. About a 1/2 inch of it, or 1/4 inch, but we want to heat up this rounded end bit and get it really melted down. The reason for this is because the frit that we just put into our pipe is not one piece of glass with the pipe yet. I just gave it a little puff there, and I'll get to that part. But when you put the frit inside of the piece, it will stick to the wall, but it's still just a powder. It's much like sandpaper, where the sand is just glued to the paper. So to change that, we have to get it real hot, and that will melt that colored glass, or the frit, into the clear glass. And that will become one piece of glass. And that's what we want to do with the front here. Because a lot of the time, the reason why we want to do that to the front is because eventually we're going to have a punty attached to here and cut off the punty. If that's not melted down as well as it can be, it likes to crack. Because anywhere where glass is touching to itself, where two pieces of glass are touching and they cool down, if you reheat them, they like to shatter. So we're going to try to avoid that and heat up that front bit. And now I melt down that front bit like I have been. Just warm up a little bit. The can's been cooling down. If you take a long time in this process doing anything, don't be afraid to warm up your whole can. When I normally work, I'm working fast enough for things not to break on me or get too cold. But as I talk and I'm doing my lesson, I go a little bit slower. So I need to warm things up sometimes, even more than I necessarily normally would need to. So don't be afraid to go warm some stuff up if things are taking you a little extra time or you have to think about something. Now back to what we're doing. So I closed up the front of this guy. Now I melted him down real hot and gave him a little puff. The only reason I gave him a little puff is because it's going to want to thicken up on you. You want to retain that wall thickness. And I don't know how much you can see in the video, but you can kind of see there in the video, you've got hot red glass, and then you've got a little bit of clear right around that red glass. That clear you're seeing around that red glass, that's the thickness of your piece. So that's a good indicator that your frit is all melted down. Your frit's going to go through a little process. It's going to look like it's just barely stuck to the surface, like in the very beginning. And then as you start warming it, like I did with the front, it's going to start looking speckly, because some of the glass is going to start melting in, and then in between that glass is not going to totally melt in. And you can kind of see it right here in the middle, in between where it's melted in and where it's not. It gets a little bit speckly. Then after the speckliness, it's going to look milky, because all of that color is going to melt in and become one consistent piece of glass, and it's going to look like that hot, milky, solid colored red glass that we saw earlier on the front. So now once it's milky and melted, you know it's melted in and you're good to go and you can smoke out of it. So now that I got this front here all melted in, I'm going to connect up a punty. So I get the tip of the front all hot, I get the punty all hot, and I connect them together. Now the next step is we're going to go in, we're going to melt down this frit and try to get it a little bit closer to milky before we finish out making our pipe. Now that I have this punty all connected, got them sealed, came out of the flame, let it cool down. I'm going to use a major flame to go a little bit faster, but we're going to heat up all of this tubing. We're just going to get all the tubing hot. We're not making a pipe yet. Right now we're just making colored tubing. So we're going to get this all hot, back and forth. And this is just like when I made the how to make a fume pipe. This is what we call the typewriter. So you slowly spin and go all the way to the left and all the way to the right side. Slowly spin all the way to the left, all the way to the right side. And avoid hitting your blow tube or your punty. Now you see it start getting a little speckly. And then it's going to start looking a little bit more milky for me. And you'll notice that I'm lagging a little bit on the left and right hand side. That's because the middle gets hit twice every time that you make a move back and forth. So I like to lag a little bit on my left and right side. Now that it's looking a little bit more milky, a little bit more melted in, I'm starting to see that clear layer form in the outside. I'm going to give it a little puff to retain its wall thickness. And you can use a blow hose to puff, or you can use your mouth. But you keep it straight, get it to your mouth, or use your blow hose, and give it a little puff while spinning. And to the best of your ability, retain its cylinder shape. What we just did melted down that frit a lot, and that will help it from breaking later when we start working on the bowl. Now the first thing we're going to do, now that we've melted all this down, is we're going to make our pipe. And this is pretty much going to be very similar to the how to make a fume pipe version. And we're going to heat up 1/2 of our can. We're going to go right to the middle of our can, and then I'm going to go down all the way to the left side. Unlike the fume pipe, we're going to heat up a lot more of our blow tube. Unlike our fume pipe, we're going to heat up a lot more of this tapered glass here closer to the blow tube. We do not want to hit our blow tube, but we want to go real close to that blow tube. And then the reason for this is because in the fume pipe tutorial, I left this section by the blow tube unmelted, and that left it bulbous so that we were left with a mouthpiece. But with this one, with this one, you won't have that. We are not going to leave our mouthpiece bulbous. We're going to blow that up later, because we've got to melt in all that frit. So now what I'm doing, I'm going back and forth and doing the same thing I just did for the whole can, and doing it in small scale. I'm just getting half the can. And after a while, you're going to see that clear glass start building up around the edge. That's your wall thickness, and that's a measurement of how thick your actual pipe is. You want to see that clear glass start building up. And I'm just going to go back and forth. Your hands are going to want to pull apart, but you need to keep your hands together as best you can. Push, push, push. See, if I push together, it gets more bulbous like a football. If I pull apart, it looks a little bit more cylinder, and then we'll start looking more peanut shaped. You want to keep it as cylinder as possible. And And then once you have that all milky frit, and you have that nice clear layer, and you know that it's nice and thick and gathered up, then you give it a little pull outside the flame. So you go back and forth, make sure it's as even as possible, nice and thick, nice and hot, and then I come out of the flame and I give it a little pull. Nice and slow. I'm not yanking at it. I'm basically just letting gravity and my own weight in my hands and everything pull apart. It's just a very gentle pull. Keep spinning. And there we go. You get yourself a little neck. Keep that pull going and keep that spin going, and I'll make sure that it's nice and straight. And that will give our neck of our pipe. But now we don't have a mouthpiece. Our mouthpiece isn't bulbous enough to be a mouthpiece. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down here and melt down where I want my mouthpiece, right after the blow tube. And I keep heating, 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 and I'm going to push them together. Push, push, push. Push my blow tube, push my punty, and you'll see that gather up a little bit of glass. Once that's gathered up a little bit more bulbous, you can give it a little puff. Use your blow hose or your mouth. Keep it straight by spinning. Give it a little tiny puff and allow that to expand and stay straight. And now I have a little mouthpiece, a little bulbous area where it can have a little mouthpiece. Now, once we've done that, you can do this by connecting up a blow tube to the opposite side and working that section much like you would the bowl of your pipe. But that way that I just did is a little bit faster, kills two birds with one stone. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop down and I'm going to disconnect my punty. And this is why we melted down the frit over here earlier. If we hadn't, the frit likes to crack right here. So now I detach this punty, and it looks like I have a little extra clear on the front, so I'm going to rip that off. And there we go. And now, I'm almost done, but I got to blow up the bowl. Now everything else from here on out is the same as the how to make a fume pipe tutorial. You're going to blow up your ball, pop your hole, push your bowl, carb it, and flatten. So the next step is I got to blow up this section of glass, the section of glass I haven't touched yet, and I'm going to blow that up, and that's going to be my ball. So let's heat that guy up. And remember, I could have done this with the mouthpiece as well if I connected up a blow tube to this side. Connected a blow tube, I could blow this up just like the ball, one-handed, rather than using two hands. I like to use two hands and do it the way I do it because it's much faster. Here we go. So now I'm getting this all hot, getting it all gathered up. Keep spinning, get it nice and hot. And the section of glass you're heating here is bigger than the flame you have. So you got to move your flame back and forth nice and even like the typewriter. Making sure that the center of the flame hits all the way to the left, all the way to the right. Now that's all hot, I'm going to come up out of the flame and give it a couple puffs. Notice how I'm angling backwards to gather that glass back. And I give it a couple puffs. And that'll give you a nice little ball, but it's not quite spherical how I really want it. I like to either go for a perfect sphere or even a spheroid, where it's gathered a little bit farther back and looks a little bit more like a doorknob. We get that ball hot again, and the ball's just about the size of my flame, so I don't actually have to move back and forth too much. Little slight angle back, heating, give it a little puff. I got myself a little bit of a spheroid there. There we go. Now I'm going to push my bowl. Got to pop my hole, push my bowl. I'll let that cool down a little bit. So now I'm going to lean in the flame where I want my bowl hole. Remember, you want to pop your bowl hole not at 90 degrees. You want to pop it a little bit more acute so you can see into your bowl when you push it. You lean in the flame, give it a little puff. Now pop open, and I just lean it in the flame and I heat up a little dime size amount. Remember, just heat up a little dime size amount, a little puff, pops your hole. And the hole is popped at this angle. There, it's not up like here, it's at that angle. Now I'm gonna go right around that hole, heat it up. Remember, you can get a more direct shot, go right around and trace the hole, or brush up against it, both sides, but you want to heat up a nickel size to a quarter size amount around that hole. Every couple of seconds, give it a puff on that hole to retain the hole size. Got to retain the hole size as you do this because it's going to want to close up on you as you heat it. Alright, now that it's getting hot, it's hot around the hole. The hole's the right size. I'm going to bring it down to a graphite pad, line up my bowl push straight to the hole, and then push down. And because the hole's at a slight angle like I mentioned, I like to lift my pipe so that the hole is aimed directly at the ground, and then I get a nice straight push. You can have the pipe down horizontal to the table and push at an angle forward. That works well too. Once you have your bowl, see I just pushed that in there, now I've got my bowl, you can polish your bowl a little bit with your flames. Sometimes you can have tool marks from the bowl push. And then you're going to cap that hole with a reamer and then pop your carb. And popping your carb is just like pushing your bowl. You heat up a dime size amount, give it a little puff, and she'll pop. Go. Pop my carb. And now I'm going to flatten it. So I heat up right below my bowl. And we have to do a little flat spot right underneath where we pushed our bowl so that the pipe doesn't wiggle around on the table. We have to create a little flat spot here so that the pipe doesn't wiggle around. So now I'm going to heat up where I want to manipulate it. I'm going to heat up where I want it to flatten. And I like to just line up with the flame and sit the pipe into the flame. You can also have the flame shoot directly at the piece. And then I like to use a graphite pad that's sitting on a table, but for the purpose of this tutorial and the positioning of my camera, I'm going to use my paddle here. So I'm going to come up and you put your mouthpiece first, and then you touch down to where it's hot, and that will flatten it. And there we go. And now wherever you touch with the tool, you want to polish off a little bit. Make sure you get rid of tool marks. And that's your pipe. And now, with anything that you make, your mouthpiece is going to be real cold by the time you do your finishing move. So you're going to want to get this guy into the kiln, let the kiln warm it up, and then you're going to go and mouthpiece it. Otherwise, you might break your mouthpiece. I had a student that broke every pipe he made for the first 3 months on the torch because he kept forgetting to put it in the kiln first. Finish your piece, put it in the kiln, then mouthpiece it. So here we go. We got this guy. I'm going to throw him in the kiln real quick, and then we'll mouthpiece him. Time to mouthpiece. So now I grab a hold of my claw grabbers. Drop down into the flame. Sometimes I like to flash it in the flame before I go for it. But you can just leave her in the flame. You're going to cut off your blow tube. First thing, you're going to claw grab up. So you're holding onto your pipe. You're going to come down and cut off that blow tube. Pulling away your blow tube, keeping your piece in the flame, keeping it nice and straight. Now we've got that nub of glass there, and we've got a little bit of clear. We've got some extra glass there we don't want. So now what we're going to do, we're going to take a punty. We're going to get hot all that glass that we don't want there. Gather up all the glass there you don't want, any extra glass, and we're going to rip that off. Touch to it, spin on the tip of your piece, and rip that guy off. Now once you have most of that glass off, now we're going to do my little mouthpiecing technique where you're going to melt down this front area, gather up just a little bit of glass, and then barely tap to the center of it. Barely tap and pull. Nice and slow. And that's going to create a really nice, thick, pointy elf hat. I call it an elf hat. Why? Because when you pull it down, you cut it in the flame, it's this little tiny point. So you're going to be left with this little tiny point, and it's like a little pointy elf hat. Now what you're going to do is you're going to melt down that elf hat, just the tip of it. You're going to melt down that elf hat until the little lit up part there, the little lit up dot, that's about the size of the mouthpiece you want. I touch to it and rip off that glass. Pull it away. Whatever you get hot is what's going to move. So you get hot just that elf hat, melt it down just to the size of your mouth. You want to melt down that elf hat just to the size of your mouthpiece. Touch, pull away. Now you've got a really, really thin elf hat while your mouthpiece itself has retained thickness. So now I'm going to take this blow tube here that I originally had attached to it, and I'm going to heat up the tip until it's glowing hot. And then I'm going to wrap it down over the elf hat, just to the point where it touches to where I want my mouthpiece. See, I just took that hot glass and I globbed it over the elf hat. Now once it cools a little bit, I wiggle it and it will break off. That'll leave me with a perfect little hole for my mouthpiece. I bring that into the flame and I polish it off. I'm just doing the angle I'm at is just for the camera. But you're going to take your little mouthpiece here and you're going to polish off your mouthpiece. And voila, you're all done. Got a perfect little mouthpiece hole. Carb, flat spot, bowl. There she is. I'm going to take this guy, throw him in the kiln. She's ready to smoke. There we go. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed.